Have you watched the third lecture in my series Biblical Hebrew 101 on Hebrew nouns, and have you had some time to digest and think through the material, maybe even practice some of it that I presented in that lecture? If so, then, and if you want some practice on applying the knowledge that you gained in that lecture, then this episode of Theapologetics is for you. Hi, this is Chris Date, and welcome to Theapologetics, where every other week I discuss a wide variety of theological issues and show how a properly biblical worldview can help defend the historic Christian faith from its critics. Join me as we think through what we believe and why we believe it, and not something else. Welcome back to Biblical Hebrew 101. If you have not been watching the lectures that I've published in this series, especially Lecture 3, and if you're not familiar with the contents of the textbook Basics of Biblical Hebrew, 2nd edition, published by Zondervan, the authors are Pratico and Van Pelt, then you'll be getting a limited amount of value from this practice that we're going to be doing today, because the practice that we're going to do today is based on the third lecture in my series, which itself is based in part on that book, that textbook that I just mentioned. Doesn't mean you'll get no value out of this. If you've got, or if you've already got some proficiency with Biblical Hebrew, there may be some value to this, to you in this practice. We're going to be doing a knowledge check on the concepts and things that I presented in that lecture, which, if you're proficient to any degree in Biblical Hebrew, you should know the material we'll be going through there. And then in the second part of this practice, we'll be doing we'll be going through the vocabulary in the 4th chapter of Basics of Biblical Hebrew, in random order. So we're going to practice our vocabulary and make sure we understand that. And if you, again, have somewhat of a proficiency in Biblical Hebrew, you'll probably know all or most of that vocabulary, so you'll get some value there. And then finally, we'll go through some workbook exercises in the textbook that cover the chapter that our lecture corresponds to. And again, if you have some degree of proficiency in Biblical Hebrew, that may be useful for you as well. So this isn't only for people that have watched my third lecture, and this isn't only for people that are familiar with Pratico and Van Pelt's Basics of Biblical Hebrew, but those are the ones who will get the most value, I think, out of this lecture. So just keep that in mind. Now let's go ahead and begin with that first section I mentioned. We'll go through the concepts and principles and things that I presented in Lecture 3, beginning with this question here. And actually, let me back up a second. I'm going to go through all three of these sections faster than I have done in previous exercise entries in this series, and that's because I've gotten some feedback from people who said that I was just moving too slowly. So first of all, after you've gone through this exercise, please consider commenting in the comments with whether you think that the faster pace was an improvement upon the previous exercise videos or actually made things worse. Or if it doesn't matter at all, that's valuable feedback as well. But if you are somebody that would have preferred that I go slower, then whenever I have a question up on the screen, or a vocabulary word, or a workbook exercise up on the screen, and you're afraid I'm going to move on too fast before you're ready, then just pause it. You know, let the question appear on the screen, pause it, and then once you think you know the answer, resume it, and then you'll hear me say it. All right? If people don't like, in general, how much faster I'll be going through this set of exercises, then I will go back to a slower cadence, and you can simply turn up the speed in YouTube to 1.5 or 2 times, whatever you want to do there. All right, first question. How do analytic languages convey word relationships, or relationships between words, with helper words in word order? How do synthetic languages convey word relationships, embedding those relationships in the forms of the words themselves? And finally, of these two, analytic and synthetic, which kind of language is Hebrew considered to be? And the answer is synthetic. meaning that the relationships between words are often embedded in the words themselves. So, you know, we looked at a sentence in the lecture in an English translation of the Bible where you have, I think it was something like 9 words in a sentence, each comprised of 2 or more letters each. And that same sentence in the biblical Hebrew is just 2 words. And so that's a way of showing how helper words and word order are what communicate relationships in an analytic language like English, whereas it's all embedded in the forms of the words themselves in synthetic languages like Hebrew. What are the characteristics or properties of Hebrew nouns? The answer is gender, number, and state. What are the possible genders of Hebrew nouns? In other words, if you're asked what gender a Hebrew noun is, what could your possible answers be? Masculine or feminine, or both. This is a little bit important because if you've studied biblical Greek or perhaps other languages, Greek and some other languages have a third gender, which is neuter, meaning that you actually have 3 kinds of, 3 forms a word might take depending upon whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter. Hebrew has no neuter, and so a Hebrew noun is either going to be masculine or feminine, or it's the same word regardless of whether it's masculine or feminine. Same word, same form. Does grammatical gender match natural gender? Remember, grammatical gender is, again, the answer to the question, what gender is this Hebrew noun? But natural gender is, what is the gender of the thing that that noun represents in reality? And the answer to this question, do those genders match, is often, but not always. So, Bane, for example, is son, and it's not the sun in the sky, but like your male child. And that Bane is masculine grammatical gender, and of course a son is masculine natural gender. The same kind of match happens with bat, which means daughter. Bat is feminine grammatically, and a daughter is a female. So those match. But then you have words like barit, meaning covenant, and Torah, meaning law, and others, which have no natural gender. And it's just going to either be a masculine grammatical gender or a feminine one. So they don't necessarily match. And there may even be feminine objects in real life, entities in real life that do have a gender that is not the same as the word's grammatical gender. So this isn't a hard and fast rule. Often grammatical and natural gender match, but not always. What are the possible numbers of Hebrew nouns? And by this I don't mean what numbers are there in Hebrew, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but rather if asked what number a Hebrew noun is, what are the possible values you might answer with? And the answers are singular, dual, or plural. Now, dual is fairly obvious. It means that it refers to 2. That's kind of what dual means. So therefore, do plurals refer to 3 or more? And the answer is no. The plural can also refer to 2. You see, the dual is not for every case in which you're referring to 2 things. The dual tends to refer to things that naturally come in pairs, like hands and eyes and feet and legs. And it can also be used in certain expressions of time or measure. But the plural is often used for 2 as well. So in the very first book of the Bible, when the author says that God created the 2 great lights, the sun and the moon, that's not a natural pair, and so it's actually the plural that is used there for lights, not the dual. What are the possible states of Hebrew nouns? Again, if asked what state a Hebrew noun is, what are the values you might give? Absolute or construct. And remember, we're going to learn construct later. For now, you can assume that any noun you're working with is absolute in our workbook exercises and practices and things like that. But the reason why I want you to start thinking in these terms, absolute or construct, now is so that in the future, when you are taught construct, you won't have to adjust your thinking when you're thinking about, you know, what the properties of a Hebrew noun are. I want you to, from the beginning, think in terms of these 3 characteristics of a Hebrew noun, not 2, and then later have to add a third. All right, the form of a Hebrew noun as it appears in the dictionary is called what? lexical form. And that's because a Hebrew dictionary is called a lexicon. What does one do when asked to parse a Hebrew noun? So here we're talking specifically about that word parse. What does it mean when we're talking about Hebrew nouns? You provide its gender, its number, its state, and its lexical form. So take, for example, the word devarim. Devarim. That is a masculine, plural, absolute, and its lexical form is davar, meaning word or thing. So that's the kind of thing you're to do when asked to parse a Hebrew noun. What does it mean to inflect a Hebrew noun? And the answer is, it means to change the noun's form to express a combination of gender, number, and state. So davar is the word meaning word or thing. We just talked about that. And if I was asked to inflect it to express a combination, the combination of gender, number, state that is masculine, plural, and absolute, then I would change davar to devarim. So that's what it means to inflect, to change its form of to change a noun's form from expressing one combination of gender, number, and state to expressing a different combination of gender, number, and state. How is a Hebrew noun inflected for gender, number, and state? By adding endings. Now, this is a generalization. There are additional changes that we went through in the lecture and which we'll go through today, besides just adding endings. But adding endings is sort of the beginning. It's the foundational thing that you do to inflect a Hebrew noun. What is the resulting form of a Hebrew noun called? So after you take the lexical form davar and you change it to devarim to express masculine, plural, absolute, what is that resulting form called? It's called its inflected form. What endings are usually added to inflect a Hebrew noun? So here I'm asking you to reproduce mentally or verbally, if you want to answer me vocally, the table that has masculine and feminine columns and then singular, plural, and dual rows. All right, so I want you to tell me what the characteristic endings in each of those 6 combinations of gender and number, what the endings are, the characteristic endings. So I'm going to put it up on the screen and walk through them one by one. The masculine singular has no distinctive ending. So if you pull out a sampling of masculine singular nouns out of the lexicon, you're not going to find any distinctive ending that is characteristic of masculine singular. Feminine singular, however, does have some distinctive endings. Often it ends with a comma-te, ah. Often feminine singular nouns end in a tav. Now there are vowels that need to precede that tav if it's a feminine singular, but I don't, and if you want to memorize those, you can just go to Basics of Biblical Hebrew chapter 4 and they'll list all of those vowel combinations. But I don't think you need to take up the space in your memory to remember those vowels. If you just remember that tav is very often the ending of a feminine singular noun, I think that suffices. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to be guaranteed to get it right if you identify a noun as feminine singular if it ends in a tav. I'm just saying there's a decent chance that it will be. Moving on to the plural, the masculine plural characteristic ending is im. That's a hirek yod followed by a mem. The feminine plural characteristic ending is ot. That's a holam vav followed by a tav. And then finally, moving on to the dual, here the forms for both masculine and feminine are the same. Ayam. That's a patach, yod, a patach, a yod, a hirek, and a mem. Ayam. But in the feminine, sometimes in order to make it possible to end with ayam, a taf has to first be added in there. And so, if I remember correctly, Torah becomes, or not Torah. Oh yeah, if Torah were to be made dual, you would have something like Torah Tayim. So they are putting the Kametz Taf in there first, and then accenting the Tav, and then putting the Ayim dual ending. But it's still ayim. That's still the characteristic dual ending. Just there's a little bit more that sometimes comes before it, and with some feminines. From what 3 consonant units do Hebrew words derive? To put it another way, what unit made up of 3 consonants do all Hebrew words derive, at least theoretically? And the answer is roots. This is not characteristic only of Hebrew. This is the case with many Semitic, or maybe even all Semitic languages, is that the words derive from roots. Now, how does a Hebrew root inform the meaning of words derived from that root? Maybe another way to think of this question is what relationship is there between words that all derive from the same root? And the answer is that the root provides to all of the derived words a general notion, and those derived words make that notion more specific. So, just as one example, melech means king, mamlacha means kingdom, if I'm remembering correctly, and you can see that both of those have something to do with ruling, and they both come from the root mem lamech chaf, which has something to do with reigning or ruling. So it's made more specific in the case of melech to become one who rules, a male specifically who rules, and it's made more specific in mamlacha by referring to the scope of such a ruler's rule. What are the 3 consonants in such a root called? And here the answer is radicals. So when you hear radical in the context of Hebrew, you're not talking about, whoa, that's awesome, totally radical. You're talking about the consonants that make up the root from which Hebrew words derive. What do Pratiko and Van Pelt, the authors of Basics of Biblical Hebrew, what do they call a Hebrew noun's stem? Or maybe I should put it this way. They call something a stem in the context of Hebrew nouns. What is that something? And the answer is the consonants that comprise the noun's lexical form. So in the case of melech and mamlacha, which we just talked about, they share the root mem lamech chaf, right? But they have different stems. The stem in the case of melech is that same root, right? You've got a mem, a lamed, and a chaf, and then you've got the vowels in between. But in the case of mamlacha, it has that same root, but its stems are mem, lamed, chaf, and hey. Okay. What does stem usually refer to in Biblical Hebrew? This is not something that you find out in Pratiko and Van Pelt's chapter 4, and so I'm adding this in here as I did in my lecture because I don't want you to be confused when you hear the word stem. Because although Pratiko and Van Pelt use the word stem to refer to the consonants in a noun's lexical form, usually stem, in the context of Biblical Hebrew, refers to a particular characteristic of verbs. Just as a little bit of a preview, the very first stem of verbs that you will be learning is the qal stem, Q-A-L. And then after you have learned some things about verbs in the qal stem, then you'll be learning another stem and so forth. So I want you to remember that when you see the word or hear the word stem in the context of Biblical Hebrew, you're usually thinking about, or you should usually be thinking about, a characteristic of Hebrew verbs rather than nouns. Why consider practicing the plural forms of vocabulary when you're memorizing it, when you're going through flashcards and things? Because some stems change when the words are made plural. The example I gave you in the lecture were the words isha, meaning woman or wife, and ish, meaning man or husband. Ish, the stem is aleph, yod, shin, but the plural form is anashim. So it's no longer just those 3 radicals. There's some additional radicals, and one has been replaced. And similarly with isha, the stem is aleph, shin, hey, I believe, and the sheen is doubled with a dagesh forte, but the plural of isha is nashim. So the aleph just disappears entirely, and then you have a characteristically masculine ending for it. So I'm just saying, this is why it's helpful. If all you have on your flashcard is ish, you might remember that its plural is anashim, but it wouldn't be something you'd easily figure out just by applying all the rules of pluralization, because it's not just the vowels that change, it's also the stem itself. And that's why it's useful, I think, to include plurals in your vocabulary practice. How does pluralization often change a word's first vowel, particularly when the first of two syllables is accented? The answer is it reduces to a shava, or a composite shava, if that first vowel is under a guttural, or reish. Gutturals and reish, you'll recall, do not take a shava, so you have to put a composite shava under it if you're going to have a shava at all. And so when the word's first vowel reduces to a shava, but it's under a guttural or a reish, you'll need to make it a composite shava. And this is the example I gave earlier. Davar becomes devarim, right? So there's a shava under the daled there at the beginning. Devarim, not davarim, but devarim. What is this phenomenon called, specifically when the first of two syllables is accented in the original singular form of the word? The answer is propretonic reduction. And that's because in a word like davar, the comets, or maybe it's a patach, I think it's a comets, under the dalet at the beginning of the word, in the singular form, that's the pretonic syllable, because the tonic one, the one that is the accented syllable, is the second of the two syllables. But when you add the ending at the end, you now have three syllables. And so what was the pretonic is now the propretonic syllable, and it's the vowel that gets reduced typically, and so it's called propretonic reduction. How does pluralization sometimes change two-syllable words whose syllables are aye or ave? So an example of the first is the word zayit, meaning olive, and an example of the second is mavet, meaning death. What happens often, or sometimes at least, to two-syllable words when those are the syllables? The answer is the syllables contract to A or O, respectively. The A there, so zayit becomes zaytim. The aye syllable, the patach, yod, and hirek, contract to tzere yod. So zayit becomes zaytim, and mavet becomes mot, or motim. So the comets, vav, segol, those two syllables in mavet contract to become the singular syllable o, that's a holem vav, in pluralization. How does pluralization affect a final segholate? And the answer is the segholate just disappears entirely. What do you call nouns from roots whose second and third radicals are identical? You call them geminate nouns. And that's because the Latin word Gemini refers to twins. How does pluralization usually change geminate nouns? The second identical radical in the root reappears as a dagesh forte. So remember the word for example, that's ayin patach mem. The root of that word is actually ayin mem. But Biblical Hebrew doesn't like words to end in a dagesh forte, so they can't put a dagesh forte in the mem to double it, and they don't want to have amam. It would be weird. So the singular is just one of the two identical mems just disappears entirely, but when you pluralize it, that second identical mem reappears as a dagesh forte, usually in geminate nouns. What happens in pluralization when a geminate noun's second identical radical cannot take the dagesh forte? Because it's a guttural or a reish. The answer is what's called compensatory lengthening of the initial vowel. All right? So if in pluralization, the second radical should take a Dagesh forte in order to bring the third radical, the second identical one, out, to represent that third radical, the second identical one. If it can't take it, then in order to compensate for that inability, the first vowel often lengthens. What happens when the Geminate's second radical can take the Dagesh forte and the initial vowel is tsere or holam? A or O? The answer is it shortens to E or U respectively. And when I say U here, I'm talking about the kibbutz, the short U sound, not the long U sound that is the shurek. What are nouns made up of two syllables where the first syllable is accented? What are those words called? What are nouns whose first of two syllables is accented? The answer is Segholate nouns, and that's because Segholate nouns very often feature segols. Often it's both vowels in those two syllables are segols. Sometimes it's the first, sometimes it's the second. Occasionally it's none of them. So they don't always feature segols, but if they're two syllables and the first is accented, that's a Segholate. What vowel patterns do all Segholate plurals exhibit or share? Im, in the case of masculine. So davar is not Segholate, but I'll just use it here for the sake of demonstration. When it's pluralized, it becomes davarim. All right, so you have and that's true of Segholate masculine plurals. They all have a shava under the first radical, a kametz under the second, and a hirek under the third, followed by a yod and a mem. Whereas all feminine plural Segholates have the pattern ot, where the first syllable is a shava, the second is a kametz, and the third is the third vowel following the third radical is holam vav, and then taf, the characteristic feminine plural ending. Okay, so that gets us through the content of the lecture. Now let's do a little bit of flashcard practice. Okay, so here what we're going to do is we're going to go through my Quizlet flashcard set for this set of vocabulary, the vocabulary at the end of Pratico and Van Pelt chapter 4. I'm going to shuffle them up, and we're only going to be going from Hebrew to English, but remember, I encourage you, once you are comfortable with this, any given chapters of vocabulary, get to the point where you can do it from Hebrew to English and English to Hebrew. And also don't forget that I recommend that periodically you take a chapter's vocabulary or a lecture's vocabulary and you mix it in with the previous vocabulary words so that you can free yourself of having relationships between words, the order of words, so that you don't have to depend upon that. You're no longer depending upon the order of words when you're trying to recall a word's meaning. You want to mix them up, and you want to break them apart from other chapters, or you want to mix them up with other chapters' vocabulary so that you'll always get a different word coming before and following a word, and your relationship that is in your memory between the word and its meaning is only about that word and not about words before and after. So let's begin with this word. I'll pronounce it for you. It's rosh. The plural is rashim. And this means head, top, or chief, leader. Rosh Hashanah means first of the year. That's what Rosh Hashanah is in modern Jewish holidays. First of the year. Next, tzava is the singular. Tzavaot is plural. And this means army or host or war or service. Whenever you encounter Lord of Hosts in the Bible, that's what it is. It's Lord of Armies. Typically the angelic host is what they're talking about. All right, next is kol. The plural is kolot. And this means sound, voice, or noise. So when Adam and Eve hear the sound of God's footsteps in the garden after they sin, that's what they're hearing, the kol of God. Bat, and here we have an irregular plural, banot. This means daughter. Next up is isha. Again, we have an irregular plural, nashim. This means woman or wife. Next up is lave. Here I've made a mistake in that instead of putting the plural of lave, I've provided the alternative spelling of lave to become levav. The plural will depend on which of these two forms of the word the singular was. So I'll have to fix this in the future. But this means heart, mind, or will. Yeah, so not just the organ itself, but metaphorically a person's mind or will, which is for which they use the word heart. Har is the singular. Harim is the plural, and this means hill or mountain or hill country. Next is Torah. The plural is Torot. This means law or instruction, teaching, or custom. Now, in modern parlance, Torah can refer to the whole Old Testament. It can refer to just the first 5 books of the Bible. It can refer to the Mosaic Law. So there's a range of possible meaning. Most Jewish people, I think, would refer to their Old Testament. They wouldn't even think of it as their Old Testament, but they would refer to their Bible, what we call the Old Testament, probably as the Tanakh. And that's from the first letter in the 3 words Torah. That's what we're looking at here. Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. Nevi'im, which is plural of Navi, which means prophet. And so it's the prophets. And Ketuvim, I think is the last word, which is the plural of katav, which means to write or writing. So Ketuvim is writings. So you've got Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. So that's first 5 books of the Bible, or law, prophets, and writings. And you take the first of the letter from each of those words, and you get Tav, Nun, Kaf. And so you put those together and throw some vowels in there, and you get Tanakh. Okay, so if you ever hear somebody refer to their Tanakh, that's what they're talking about, the Old Testament. But, as I said, some people do just call the whole Old Testament Torah. So this word has some range. Ayin, and the plural is einayim. I think that this is somebody's eye, or a spring. Yep. Ish, and the plural is anashim. This is man or husband. And notice the irregular plural. You might have expected ish to become ishim, but no, the stem changes. It becomes anashim. Navi, the plural of which is nevi'im. Well, I've already mentioned this just a moment ago. Prophet. Adonai. Adonai. So this literally means my Lord, but it is the word that is often used to refer to the Lord Yahweh. Kohen, the plural is kohanim. This means priest. I've said this before, if you see somebody whose last name is Cohen, that's what this is. It's literally their last name is priest. Ach, and the plural achim. This means brother. Goy, and the plural is goyim. This means nation, people, and it can also mean Gentile. The Gentiles are the goyim, and a goy is a Gentile. Nefesh, the plural is nefashot. The go-to translation for this word is very often soul, but I think a better word is typically life. It can refer to a whole person or to a person's neck or throat, and that's because it has something to do with breathing. There's an association between breathing and living. When God breathes into Adam's husk of a body, Adam is then said to become a nefesh chaya, a living being. And the same is true of other animals besides human beings. They're nefesh chaya, breathing embodied creatures. So nefesh does not inherently mean soul, if it even ever does mean soul. It is more often has something to do with a life or a person, that kind of thing. Adon, and the plural is adonim. This is Lord or master. And that's why I said earlier, Adonai is my Lord, and you'll learn about why Adon, meaning Lord, becomes Adonai when it becomes my Lord. You'll learn that later in a future lecture. Sefer, and the plural is sefarim. This means book or scroll or document. And when we say book here, I don't mean a bound set of pages. They wouldn't even have that concept. Book, what our concept of a book would be the equivalent of their scroll. So you think book a little bit loosely here. It's not actually a book in the way that we tend to think of books, but a written record of something. Maybe that's a better way, other than book, to think of it. Derech is the singular, and the plural is drachim. This means a road or a way, a journey. The way of death and the way of life that God talks about is, that way is derech. Two more to go. Mayim, although it is dual in form, just means water. Not waters, but water. And then finally, ir, and the plural is arim. This isn't the ear on the side of your head. This is a city or a town. All right. So hopefully that helps you to reinforce your vocabulary. Maybe you're able to test yourself a little bit and see what gaps you might have, what areas you need to, which words you need to strengthen your memory of. But with that, let's go ahead and move on to workbook exercises. We're going through the exercises in the workbook for Basics of Biblical Hebrew, 2nd edition. And this first section of the exercise asks us to parse and thereby identify the gender and number of the following nouns. So notice they're asking you to parse, but they're only asking you gender and number, even though in the future when you're asked to parse a noun, you'll also be asked to provide the state. That's why I want you to start providing state in your parsing now, so that you don't have to adjust in the future to start remembering to add state in. I want you to be in the habit of it now, even though right now it's all going to be absolute state. Also, they're not asking you to provide the lexical form as part of parsing, and that's because they're going to be going through some words that you have not yet learned. And that's totally fine. What they're asking us to do here is to look at the ending, and from the ending, make an educated guess about what its gender and number are. We'll do that, but then we'll also say what the state is, just so we're in the habit of providing state when we're asked to parse. And I'll tell you the lexical form of any words we know. Okay? So they've given us the gender and number of dvarim. They've told us it's masculine and plural, and that you can tell from the im ending. The state is absolute, and the lexical form is a word that you know. It's in the vocabulary for last lecture, I believe, davar, meaning word or thing. So to parse davarim, you say masculine, plural, absolute from davar. The first one that it asks us to complete, number 2, is shoftim. Shoftim. And we can see that im ending at the end, and from that make an educated guess that this is masculine plural, just like our previous one. Absolute state, and this is from the noun shofet, which you do not know yet if you only know the vocabulary that I've given you thus far. Shofet is judge. Shofet is its lexical form, and it means judge. So to parse shoftim, you would say masculine, plural, absolute, from shofet, meaning judge. The next word, shamayim, you can tell from that ending ayim that you're dealing here with a dual. The problem here, the challenge we face, is that ayim is the ending for both masculine and feminine nouns. So we can't tell from the form alone, and this isn't vocabulary that we have yet memorized. Some of you may know that this is the word for heaven, or heavens, shamayim. In fact, the very first verse of the Bible, Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God created, hashamayim, the heavens, et hashamayim, the heavens, et ha'arim, the earth. Ha'aretz, the earth. So this is heaven, and I think it's masculine, but I don't remember for certain. Again, the dual is the same in the feminine and plural anyway. Feminine and masculine is the same in dual. So masculine dual absolute from shamayim. There is no, so that's the thing about the word shamayim. You don't know this yet, it's not in your vocabulary, but there is no singular form of it. It's always dual. Next up is yeled. We can tell, if you remember that chart that lists the characteristically distinctive endings of masculine and feminine, singular, plural, and dual, there is a dalet or a segholate at the end of any of those. There is no distinctive ending. That tells us that this is masculine singular. And it's absolute. All of the state of all the words we're learning it so far is absolute. And this is from the lexical form yeled, meaning male child. Okay, boy. Yalda does have a characteristic ending at the end of it, one that's distinctively feminine. That Kometz He ending is distinctively feminine, so we'll put that here. And singular. It's absolute. And I don't know if a lexicon will list yeled and yalda separately from one another. They both refer to a child. Yeled refers to a male one. Yalda refers to a female. So this would mean young girl, little girl. Okay. Sus, again, has no distinctive ending. Not feminine singular, not masculine or feminine plural, not masculine or feminine dual. So we can say this is masculine singular, absolute, from the lexical form sus, which I think might have been in your vocabulary last lecture, and it means horse. As you might therefore be able to guess, susa means, well, look at the ending. It has that characteristic Kometz He ending, which is characteristic of feminine singular nouns. And indeed, this is the feminine singular version of sus. It's absolute, so feminine singular absolute. And again, I don't know if a lexicon will list sus and susa separately. They refer to the same thing, a horse, but one of them is masculine, the other is feminine. So susa means female horse or mare. Mishmeret. So now, I don't even know what this word means. My vocabulary is not exhaustive. But we can look at that ending tav, and I seem to remember in Pratiko and Van Pelt that one of the vowels before a tav that is characteristically feminine is a segol. But even if you didn't remember that, in my chart I gave you, a taf is a characteristic ending of many feminine singular nouns. So this is probably feminine singular. Feminine singular, absolute, from the lexical form mishmeret. What it means, I don't know. Mishmarot, notice that characteristic ending ot, holam vav followed by a tav. That is a characteristically feminine plural ending. So feminine, plural, absolute, and the lexical form is probably going to be the one that we just looked at, mishmeret, which again, we don't know what it means, but this would be the plural form of that. So mishmeret becomes mishmarot. Next is a word that you know, but more importantly than that, this has no distinctive ending, right? There's no characteristic feminine singular, no characteristically plural or dual ending, so we're going to guess that this is masculine singular, Absolute from melech. And if you know your vocabulary so far, because I think this was in last lecture, this means king. Malka, notice that notice that characteristically feminine singular ending kamete. Absolute state, and again, I don't know if the dictionary is going to list melech and malka separately, but the one is the female equivalent of the other, so queen. Malachim, notice that characteristically masculine plural ending im. So it's masculine plural absolute. The dictionary form or lexical form is melech, meaning king. By contrast, here we have malachot, and that ot ending is characteristically feminine plural. Indeed, this is feminine plural absolute from malka or melech. In other words, excuse me, a feminine version of melech. So this is queens. Next is bat, and we have that characteristic taf at the end, which suggests that this is probably feminine singular, absolute, and the lexical form is bat, and it just means daughter. Okay. Now I suppose that this might give me an indication that in the other cases I said I don't know about, whether the lexicon will list the masculine singular and feminine singular as different entries. This probably tells me that it will list both, because it's not clear how you get from bain, meaning son, to bat, meaning daughter. So I'm sure bain and bat are two separate entries in a lexicon, which tells me that probably melech and malcha are separate entries, and so on and so forth. Okay, banot. Now, here you have that ot characteristic ending, holam vav followed by a tav. That tells us this is probably feminine plural. So parsing this, we would say feminine plural absolute. And if you were trying to work backwards from banot to what the lexical form is, you might think that it's a bait and a noon, but it's not. This is actually the feminine plural form of the word that we just looked at, bat, meaning daughter. So this is daughters. So you would parse banot as feminine plural absolute from bat. Sha'ar, no characteristic ending, so we can guess that this is masculine singular, absolute from sha'ar, and this isn't in your vocabulary yet, but it means gate. Avadim, that im ending at the end tells you that this is masculine plural. It's absolute. It's from eved, meaning servant. This is servants, plural. Yom, there's no characteristic ending, so it's masculine singular. This is absolute, and it's from yom, meaning day. Yamim, that im ending tells you this is masculine plural, and absolute. And this is also from the lexical form yom. It means days. And I think you guys might have had that last lecture. Yomayim. Now this is interesting. That ayim ending means that we're dealing with a dual. Okay. The dual is the same when we're dealing with masculine or feminine. So the ending doesn't tell us if this is masculine or feminine, but I think that this is the dual form of yom, which is the word in the previous two questions. So I'm going to suggest that this is masculine dual. Navi, this is in your vocabulary, but more importantly, it has no characteristic distinctive ending. So we could say this is masculine singular, absolute, and the lexical form is navi, meaning prophet. Here we have Torah. You have a characteristic kamethe at the end, so that's feminine singular. Absolute from Torah, meaning law. Torot, you get the feminine singular ending there, ot. Absolute from Torah, so this is laws. Ish, no characteristic ending, so we're going to say it's masculine singular absolute. And indeed, this is one of the vocabulary words for this lecture. It means man, and that's its lexical form, ish. And then finally, anashim. That im ending tells you that this is probably masculine plural, absolute, and you might not be able to immediately tell, but this is the plural form of the word that we just looked at, ish. So its lexical form is ish, and this means men. All right? So now let's zoom in specifically on feminine nouns. What we're being asked to do here is go through these and identify which of the following nouns are feminine. It says that some will be exceptions to the rules of gender identification, and so refer to the grammar's lexicon if necessary. Okay, so we're asked to tell whether this is grammatically masculine or feminine. Isha has the characteristic a ending, so we can say this is feminine. And just from vocabulary, we know that it is. Nashim is the plural of that. So even though it has a characteristically male plural or masculine plural ending, we do know that this is feminine. The next one is keshet. Now, it has the taf at the end, which I have told you often is the ending of feminine singular nouns. So my guess is that this is masculine. I don't know it by heart, but what we'll do is look it up just to find out. So what was the word? The word was keshet with a kof. So keshet. We can see this is the right entry in the dictionary or the lexicon because it means bow. And we can see noun feminine. So I was right. This is feminine. Da'at. Again, that taf at the end seems to me like it's probably feminine. Let's take a look just to make sure. Da'at. Whoop. Did I spell that right? I did, but I forgot. Well, hold on. Da'at. Yeah, this is what I wanted. So knowledge. Okay. And if we look at the beginning, it says noun feminine. Oop, that F right there means feminine. So I was right. This means feminine as well. Eretz. Eretz. So here's the thing. There isn't a characteristic ending here. All right. Not even a singular one. Right. It's not a comet's hey, and it's not a taf. It's a tsadi. So you might be inclined to say, oh, this is probably masculine. But as it turns out, I'm pretty sure that eretz is feminine. And the reason I think that is because I think the feminine plural form is, or sorry, I think the plural form is aratzot, rather than say aratzim. So I'm guessing this is in fact feminine, even though you wouldn't be able to tell from the form of the word itself. And we can see that I'm wrong. So this M here tells you that this is actually masculine, which is interesting because you can see right here that the plural is indeed aratzot. But ot is a characteristically feminine plural ending. So this is why I say it's helpful to memorize, or this is another reason why it's helpful to memorize the plural when you're going through your vocabulary, is because your flashcard would say eretz, aratzot. Oh, but I guess even that still wouldn't tell you that it's masculine rather than feminine. So this is just a part of being familiar with vocabulary enough that you can tell when a word is masculine when in fact it has every indication of being feminine in one form or another. But anyway, this is masculine. Even. All right, so here, again, you have no characteristic distinctive ending. And I think that the plural form of this is avanim. So I'm going to guess masculine, but we'll look it up just to make sure. This is even. See, and I got this one wrong too. So this is feminine, and yet it has a masculine plural form ending. So that's fascinating to me. So this is why. You remember I told you in the lecture that there's an exception. There's probably an exception to every rule, All right, so even though the plural ending of eretz is a characteristically feminine plural ending, nevertheless the word is masculine. And then by contrast, even though avanim has a characteristically masculine plural ending, nevertheless the underlying word even is actually feminine. Tiferet. All right, so I don't know what this, well, I mean, I guess I do know what it means. It says it right there, glory, but I'm not familiar with this word. But going by the ending et, segol taf, I'm guessing that this is probably feminine. We'll check just to make sure. So tiferet, that's going to be spelled taf with a dagesh, hirek, pei with a shava, aleph. That's probably going to be this word here, meaning beauty or glory. Notice the singular is tifara, so that would have been a little easier to identify as feminine, and sure enough, it is feminine. All right, so we got that one right. Chokhmah. Now, just as a side note, you look at those vowels under chokhmah, and you might initially think that this should be pronounced chachma. But it's not. If you go back and watch watch lecture 2 on the rules around when a comments is a long A class vowel or a short O class vowel, you'll understand why this is chokhmah rather than chachma. And it's got a characteristically feminine singular ending, so I'm going to guess this is feminine. I'll look it up just to make sure. So choch. Ma is right there, means wisdom, and is indeed feminine. So yay me. 2 more to go. Ir, which I seem to recall is irim in the plural. There is no characteristic ending here. And if my memory serves me, and this is in our vocabulary, we just went through it, so I've already forgotten, I'm not confident that irim or arim is in fact the plural, but that has a masculine plural ending, if I'm right, so I'm going to guess this is masculine. We'll look it up just to confirm. Ir means, oh, that's the ear. ear. So that gave us a different match. We want this one, and it's actually feminine. But its form is indeed arim. So here's another case where the plural is unexpected given its gender, which is actually feminine. And then here's arim, which we also already know is feminine, because it's just a plural form of the word we just looked at. Okay, Segholate nouns. Remember the definition of a segholate. It is not a noun that features a segol or multiple segols, even though the word is Segholate. Remember, the definition of segol is simply 2 syllables, the first of which is accented. Derech, melech, and so forth. All right? So with that in mind, here we would say, yes, this is a segholate. Even. This, however, is zakein, and notice it's the second syllable that's accented, so we know that's not a segholate. Same thing with anan. Now here, sefer does not have 2 segols. It does have 1, but that's not what makes it a segholate. What makes it a segholate is that the first syllable is accented. Nahar, notice it's the second, not the first syllable that's accented, so this is not a segholate. Same thing with shachein. Zera, notice it's 2 syllables. The first one of them is accented, so we know this is a segholate. Same with na'ar, meaning young man. We know it's segholate, even though it has no segols, because it's 2 syllables and the first syllable is accented. That's not true of kohen. It's the second syllable that's accented, but it is true of etzen. So that one we know is segholate. Now here we've got a bit of advanced exercises. You are not necessarily expected to be able to do these very well, but we'll give it a shot anyway. Pluralize each of the following nouns. The required endings have been given. Irregular noun pluralizations have not been included, so that makes it a little bit easier for us. And it shows us that to go from bor, meaning pit, to pits, we need to add oat. And it's so they just put oat at the end of bor. Okay? Susim, sorry, sus means horse, and we need to add the masculine plural ending im, and we've kind of already seen this in practice. It's just going to be sus, and then add the ending susim. Sorry for the font, I can't control what font, at least not that I know of, is used in the exercise blanks in Logos Bible software. Chalom means dream, and they want us to add the ending ot, so my guess would be that this would be something like that, chalomot. Notice that the mem is not in its final form any longer because it's no longer the last letter in the word. Gachov, so that's gonna be a little difficult to pronounce. That shava is vocal, but it's hard to do a vocal shava under a resh. Nevertheless, that's what this is, Gachov. Okay, and they say we need to add the ot ending, so my guess is this is going to be Rehovot. Yeah, I think that's right. Next up is Gavul, Gavul, which means boundary or border, and we need to add the im ending, so I'm guessing this is probably just gvulim, gvulim. All right. And if you want to go through these and check, you can. This lexicon that I've got open is it's called BDB, which stands for Brown Driver Briggs, and it's one of the most standard lexicons in the study of biblical Hebrew. And it's telling us that gavul does indeed mean boundary or border or territory, and the plural form is going to be, does it even have an example of it anywhere? Maybe not. So maybe there is not a plural form in the scriptures, because I'm not seeing one here. Well, that's a bummer. I mean, we can't check it this way. We'd have to check it via the answer key. And I don't want to do that here in the middle. So we'll check it, or in the middle of the exercises. So I'll do it again. I'll check it at the end. Next is Navi. All right, now here's where we're going to get to apply some of the rules that we learned. Remember, we learned that if you have a two-syllable word where the second syllable is accented, then often what happens is the first syllable undergoes propretonic reduction. So navi is going to become n, v, im, naviim. Okay. Nahar is going to undergo a similar reduction, I suspect. I would suspect this is going to be naharot. Naharot. And maybe we can check that in the lexicon to check it out. Nahar is stream or river. There is a plural naharim, but they wanted us in the exercises to add ot. So let's see if the lexicon lists any feminine plural endings. Yeah. Oh, naharot. Although here it says it's often naharot, the way that I spelled it. So there's going to be some flexibility here. But if you applied the rules you learned in the lecture, that's what you would have come up with. Tzava, that means army. And again, here we're dealing with a pretty straightforward propretonic reduction. So, am I still in Hebrew? Yeah, tz with a shava, tzavaot. Sorry, no, tzava. Yeah, tzavaot. I forgot the aleph. Zakain means old man or elder, and again, this sounds to me like a pretty straightforward example of propretonic reduction. So z, k, neem. And notice the noon is not final form because it's not at the end of the word anymore. Zakei neem. Levav, we want to add ot. So notice they're not asking you to pluralize lave. They're asking you to pluralize levav. So this is and And this, because that opening syllable is atsere, it may be that it shortens to hirek, but that was in the case of Geminates, was it? Yeah. But that shortening happened only if the second radical takes a Dagesh forte, representing a doubling of that radical. So my guess is that this could be libot. Okay, notice I've put a Dagesh forte in the bait to indicate that there are two baits there. And because we did that, we shortened the tsere to a hirek, and then we tacked on the ending. It could be libot, but I suppose it could also be levavot. Levavot. And I'm just curious. I'm going to look it up. So, levav. Let's see here. So, yeah, notice it's using the second one I came up with, levavot. So maybe the libot option would have been if the question had been lave rather than levav. Next up we have anan, meaning cloud, and they want us to add the im ending. 2 syllables, second one's accented, so our go-to is to do proprytonic reduction, but ayin is a guttural, so we can't provide a normal shava. We have to provide a composite shava, and the reduced A-class vowel is chatav patach. Then we do the noon and the comments, and then the second noon, and tack on the im ending, and you have ananim. Next up is enav, meaning grape, and we're going to make it plural with im. So this looks like it's probably going to be proprytonic reduction, but now we need a reduced E-class vowel. The tsere is an E-class vowel in the 3-class system. So that's going to reduce to segholate. Sorry, chatav segol, the composite segol shava. And then noon, kamets, beit, hirek, yod, mem. Enavim is my guess. Enavim. Let's check that out. Enav is the word that we're looking for. So we'll go to our lexicon and we'll type in, if it ever gives us the chance, anan. Oh, that's interesting. Did I spell it right? I didn't do a final noon. Ah, there we go. But I still don't see... That's interesting. So this is supposed to... Oh, sorry, not a noon, a bait. Sorry about that. So let's do a nav. There we go. Grapes. Now that's interesting. So it looks like even though it's a tsere under the guttural and therefore reduces to a composite shava, nevertheless it reduced to a chatav patach, not a chatav segol. So again, these aren't hard and fast rules all the time, but you can also see that the difference between anavim and enavim is extremely small. So you would have been able to tell anyway if you'd encountered it with the right spelling. Next word is chatzer, and they want us to put on ot to make it plural. Here again, it looks like we've got proprytonic reduction. The chet is a guttural, so it can't take a komets, so we're going to do it can't take a shava, but it can take a composite shava, and so we'll add a chatav patach under it, and then provide the tzadi, the reish, the tsere, the reish, and then the ot ending. Chatzerot. That would be my guess. Derech, all right, derech, and they want us to add im at the end. So this is going to be, this is a segholate, and segholates all follow the same vowel pattern in the plural. A'im, or a'ot if we're dealing with a feminine. In this case, it's a'im. So, de, ra, chim, derachim, derachim. Next up is Torah, and we need to make it something like Torot. And this does not look to me, you might think that this is going to undergo propretonic reduction because it's two syllables, Torah, and the second one is accented, Torah. But I'm almost certain this does not become Tarotim or something like that, or Tarowot, or, you know, it's not going to undergo reduction. I suspect that this is just the comma's hey at the end lops off and gets replaced with the ot ending. So I'm just going to say Torot. But let's take a look just to see if I'm right. So we'll go Torah. And we can see Torot, just like we typed in. So we got that pretty right. Choma, choma, meaning wall. And we want to tack on the ot ending. This does not look to me like, you know, you have an irreducible vowel holem vav. The maters lectionis, the vowel letters as your textbook calls them, are not reducible, if I'm remembering correctly. So you can't, there can be no propretonic reduction here. So I'm guessing this is just going to be homot. Homot. Let's find out. Chaf, holem vav, mem, comets hey. Choma. Oh, no, that's the wrong version of it. Did I misspell it? Chet, holem vav, mem, comets hey. Here it is, wall. So it says the plural is chomot, just like I said. Good. Mishpacha. All right. Here, there's not going to be reduction. It's already 3 syllables, so there's not going to be a need to reduce anything, I don't think. The comets hey ending at the end is just going to be replaced by the ot ending, and you're going to have mishpachot. Sefer. Here we have another segholate. Segholates all have the same vowel patterns, and in the case of the masculine, that's a'im. So we'll say this is likely sefarim. Sefarim. Melech is a segholate, so again we can just do the a'im pattern. Malachim. Same thing with na'ar. Na'arim. Na'arim. Same thing with zera. These are all segholates, so that makes it easy. Zra'im. Zra'im. Same thing with boker. This is easy. Bakarim. Bakarim. Yeah, bakarim. Here's a segholate, but now we're in the feminine. So ot is the pattern. So ch, ra, vot, chravot. Oh, but notice that the chet is a guttural, so this is going to have to be the chataf patach, chravot. Erev is same thing. Sorry, did I say erev? I meant eretz. Aratzim. And then finally, neder. This is a segholate. So and it's masculine. They're putting a masculine ending. So I'm going to say this is probably nadarim. Nadarim. Okay. Part 2, pluralize the following nouns that are irregular in their pluralization. Okay, so this is tough because this is just remembering your vocabulary. Isha becomes nashim, ish becomes anashim, av, I think becomes avot, which is irregular because it's got a characteristically feminine ending. Let's check to make sure I'm right about that. The av, no, not that one. I should probably use halot, H-A-L-O-T, the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. That one's a little bit easier to navigate, but oh well, we're already knee-deep into it. So here's father, and we can see when we get to the listings of plurals that it's avot. See, so that's why it's saying it's an irregular plural, is because it's got a characteristically feminine plural ending. The same is not true of bat, but it is a regular plural because instead of batot, which is what you might think it was going to be, it's instead going to be banot. Beit nun vav tav. Banot. Bayit. Bayit is one of these words where the two syllables ay contract to the one syllable a. So bayit, I think, becomes bay team. But bayteam might be just batim. Let's look it up. I was just going by sort of the commonalities I'm used to, but maybe there's a different way that it works. So here's bayit, and when we get to plurals is well, shoot. Let's see here. I'm having trouble finding any plurals in their listings. This is construct, by the way. You'll learn that in a future lecture. Oh, here it is, plural. So it's batim. So that's why it's irregular, is because you would expect. Yeah, duh. I forgot these were irregulars. So, although I did sort of think that the reason it was irregular is because of the syllabic contraction, but no, in this case, the issue is that the instead of the normal rules that you might follow, the bayit becomes ba. Oh, see, I've already forgotten. What was it? The comets remains a comets, and you just and then you get rid of the yod in the middle and you slap on the ending. So ba team. City, ir. Okay, so here's an example. This is going to, I think it becomes arim. That was in your vocabulary, so I'm not going to go look it up. You can look it up yourself. Arim. Son, bane. So this is irregular because instead of taking a masculine plural characteristic ending, it takes a feminine plural characteristic ending. So bane, I think, becomes ba. Banot? But wasn't that what we said daughter was? Banot. Okay. So what does bane become in the plural? Batim, maybe? Let's look it up. And maybe I got bot wrong. Maybe it's not banot. I think it is, but let's look it up. So we'll start with bot. And we can see that bat, meaning daughter, in the plural becomes banot. That much we got right up here. Oh, yeah, right. Banot. So that's good. But what about bane? Does it become batim or banim? And we'll find out in a second. Here's bane. And plural becomes... let's see if I can find it. Well, okay. Ben, beni, bean, ben. Here it is, plural, sorry. Banim. Okay, so bane becomes banim. And that's why it's irregular, is because the you don't just slap the ending on. You get rid of, or you change the tsere to a comments, banim. Right? Man, Logos is slow sometimes. Okay, one last one, and then we will bid each other adieu. Adieu. Yad. This is a word meaning hand. Now, remember, natural pairs typically take the dual when referring to two, and chances are, I would guess that yad never takes a plural form. It probably always takes a dual form. So so you might be tempted to think this is going to be yadayim. That would be my guess, but I don't know why that would be irregular. Whoops. So this would be my guess, yadayim. But let's look at the lexicon and see what it says the plural of yad is. Or sorry, the dual, not the plural. So the dual is yadayim. It is exactly what we said, yadayim. It does look like, however, there is a feminine plural, in fact, yadot, and maybe that's what it was asking us for, except there too, I don't know what the irregularity would be. So that's what it would have been if it had been plural and not dual, is yadot, and that would technically, that is what it's asking for, pluralize. So we could make it yadot and we'd be good. So that's all of the exercises for chapter 4. Hopefully that gives you an idea of or helps to reinforce some of the material that we went over in lecture 3. Hopefully it keeps you learning and internalizing and digesting what it is that we've learned so far, so that when the next lecture comes out, which I'll tell you what it is in a moment, you'll be prepared to move on. So keep watching the lectures. If you need to watch them multiple times, refer back to them if you have any questions. Keep practicing your vocabulary. Between now and the next lecture, I want to publish a video on how to type in Hebrew. And then we'll get to lecture 4 in Biblical Hebrew 101, which will be on the definite article the and the conjunction the, meaning and. Okay? So until then, Toda Rabah. Toda Rabah. Thanks a lot. I've been your host, Chris Date, and thanks so much for watching The Apologetics, where we think together through what we believe, why we believe it, and not something else. If you've enjoyed this episode, please click the thumbs up, like icon, the subscribe button, and the bell icon to receive notifications when new videos are streamed or uploaded. Either way, come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of The Apologetics, streaming live on YouTube every other Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific. Until then...